I thought that there was mold behind the wall, which would be a source of a problem, right, I would test behind the wall because you test where you think the problem is. But then I would step away like 2-3 feet away and I would put in a quote air quality air test up just a few feet away. And 78% of the time I got a false negative on that when there was literally a mold source in the wall a couple feet away. And so the first thing that would happen in this scenario is that you get a false negative and then you have your inspector tell you, hey, there's no mold, everything's fine.
Hey gang, it's Chris, and today I'm interviewing Brian Karr from We Inspect. Now, Brian is a second-generation indoor environmental consultant, and he specializes in assisting hypersensitive individuals with complex medical conditions by identifying and addressing mold, mycotoxins, and other indoor pathogens in their homes, leading to obviously health improvements. That's the goal. And I think a lot of people have sick building syndrome. They have mysterious symptoms of illness or disease that the doctors haven't been able to figure out. And in some cases, this has to do with their home environment, or it could be work environment. And Brian is the co-founder of We Inspect and also a test called the Dust Test. And he has quite a big following. He's an authority on mold and biotoxin issues and helped over 5,000 people. And so anyway, I'm excited. Brian, his podcast is called Mold Finders, and you can find him on social media under Mold Finders. And anyway, Brian and I did an interview last year, I guess, but we had major technical problems and went to edit it, and it was worthless. It was unusable. So thanks for doing this take two, Brian. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Honestly, no time has passed. It feels like it's like a whole new thing. So
it's a whole new thing. I forgot what we even talked about.
I know it's the worst when you like do it and you're like, oh, we have to do this tomorrow or the next day. And then you're like repeating everything, but now it's fresh. It
feels like a drag. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, good. So I'd love to, obviously, mold is an issue with my audience, an issue. And I say it's an issue of interest to me and to my audience, and especially again, environmental toxins, mycotoxins, stuff in the home or the workplace that can be making you sick. I'm excited to dig into this with you because I think a lot of people assume that if they don't see black mold growing on the walls, that they're fine, that there's no mold issue, there's no problem. And I know that's not the case. In fact, we bought a house a few years ago. This was maybe 2019, and had to have a mold inspection, and it came back and it found some stuff. And it turns out initially we were alarmed, because it was like a 24-hour mold test, and they had come up with some, the results were not great. And turns out mold was in some of the rugs, which was an easy fix. Just got rid of the rugs. And problem solved. So it wasn't, embedded in the house. But anyway, so I have a little bit of experience with that. But how did you got into this? It's a family business, I guess, right?
It's a family business. It wasn't the plan at the start. I didn't go to school to be a mold person. I don't think people do that. So generally, there's some sort of event or something that happens that sort of opens someone's eyes to this whole thing that exists. And for some people, there's, a passion that ignites from it. And for others, they just want to get through it. For me, it was the first. And I think the reason that it was is because my father-in-law, who at the time was not my father-in-law, I had literally just been dating his daughter, my wife now, for like a couple of months. So it was like super early on in that whole process of everything. And anyways, I had like a leak in my apartment. I had a pipe burst in my ceiling in my apartment, kind of flooded down into my bed. I actually had to dive out of my bed with my laptop in my hands to protect my laptop. So there's a lot of water that came out. And, at the time, most people, I didn't know anything, right? I knew nothing about any of this stuff. So what do? You call your landlord when something like that happens. And you're like, hey, had this thing happen. I don't know what to do. Come fix it. Right. And you think, it's so common. We think that certain individuals must be experts at something because they happen to own a building or they happen to do something else. And a lot of times, I've learned now, and I think a lot of people now that there's more information available, just kind of all over the place, kind of learn that not everyone really knows everything about everything. And it's really like understanding like what their core driver is in how they make decisions. If someone owns a building and they make money off of you living in the building, then their goal is not to give you a healthy place to live. Their goal is to make as much money as they can off of the unit that you live in, right? And so it's interesting when you start trying to think of the motivation behind different individuals that you're kind of working with and surrounding yourself with, or just who's like in your world. Because when you try to look at stuff from their perspective, it's not even that it's bad. It's just, oh, I understand like what this perspective is now, and it's not in alignment with like my best interests. I need to now take control of my best interests, and that's kind of like something that happens. And so anyways, they send out their maintenance guy and fix the pipe leak, and they dry out the ceiling area up here, and they say, okay, everything's fine. And some time passes, I start getting symptomatic, right? And it starts with like memory stuff, which is a really common symptom for people. Effectively, if you tie it back, you're kind of looking at like brain inflammation from immune response, right? And so that's kind of like what's happening. And it's funny, that wasn't the thing that like made me go like freak. It's so ridiculous that wasn't the thing. Is such an important thing, and that wasn't it. But that's
such a weird connection to make too. Like I wouldn't have ever made that connection. Like if like I feel like I'm having a hard time remembering things, like like brain fog or whatever. Like that's the last thing I would think about. Would be like
it is, and it's. A lot of people talk about it too, like, and it's like, oh, I must be tired. Oh, I must be stressed. Oh, at the time I had just been laid off. It was like in the late 2000s when the economy went down, and I had just been laid off. And so I was actually looking for a job on my bed when the ceiling collapsed on me. That's why I was like, this computer's my lifeblood. What am I going to do without finding a job? And so that's kind of what happened. And anyway, so that started going on. So now I'm dating my current wife now. And I start telling him like, it's weird. I'm like I'm really sharp. I'm usually really quick. Like I feel sluggish. I feel, I'm not remembering stuff as well or whatever. And she's like, hey, my dad like works with a lot of people, and she knows the mold business. She grew up in the mold business, right? Like she wasn't in the houses, but she had worked with him, had helped him talk to clients and stuff, his family business. Right. And so, she's like, this sounds like a lot of what people he's working with, like what they're talking about. You should have him come look at the place because you had this leak, right? Like, I know this. I know that there's a mold problem, right? And me, just like everyone else out there, who when someone tells you have a mold issue in your house because of this thing, and I knew nothing, what did I do? I dismissed it. I'm like, the landlord said it was fine, right? And so it progresses, and then I wake up one morning and I have like skin breakouts. It almost looks like eczema, like red flaky patches and stuff on my face. And that's the thing, not the fact that my brain stopped working. That wasn't enough for me. The thing that was enough for me was I looked in the mirror and I wasn't pretty anymore. And that was the thing. And so then I say to her, I'm like, you know what? Let's have your dad come in here and do this. And he comes in and he finds a bunch of problems. I'm in like a little apartment in West Hollywood in LA. So it's an old building, probably, I don't know, 800 square foot apartment or something, not a huge place. He's in there for like a few hours. Like, just think about how small that is. Like, and he's in there for like 2 hours going through the whole thing. And there's stuff in my room, but he sees some other things, but my room specifically. So what had happened in my room? So imagine, for everybody who's not watching, the pipe leak happens from above my ceiling. Okay. So the leak occurs, it hits my ceiling. My ceiling's a horizontal surface. Okay. So imagine you're like holding a pitcher of water and you're at like your kitchen island or whatever, and you pour water just on your island, right? So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to go sideways when you pour it on the island. And then when it gets to the end of the island, if there's enough water, it's going to fall and drip down the sides of the island. Right? Like, that's what gravity is going to do to it. It's exactly what happened because there's so much water. That's what happened in my room. What they did is they dried out like the little circular area where like the visual stain was, but they didn't do anything else. And they didn't they didn't do anything. Right. So what happened is I was living basically in a toxic box. There was still moisture on the walls months later when he came to look at stuff. Every wall surrounding me. It was a huge problem. So I was like sleeping in this box that was hitting me every night. And I was spending way more time because I wasn't working still, right? So I wasn't even going away for the day. And it just hit me really hard. And that's kind of what happened to me. And so he helps me kind of navigate the whole thing and deal with it and actually get out of my lease. And then once that happens, I'm like, you know what? I'm still looking for a job. This was amazing. You know, the landlord brought their own mold guy in, beforehand. And it was like, here's an air test in your room. Everything's fine. Right. And like, that's what happens all the time. Then Mark comes in, who's my father-in-law, and he does all this stuff. And I'm like, I think I want to do this. This was like so interesting. Like, what am I doing right now? And it was interesting because I talked to him about, I was like, I want to work with you. And he's like, all right, like slow down for a minute. He's like, why don't you shadow me for like a month? Like, come see what I do, like in person. And if you're still interested, we could talk about it. So I do that, still interested. And here you go. That was kind of like where it all started.
That's amazing. And, you know, so many people that are in our industry, the health and wellness industry, you know, you end up in it because of your own personal experience, right? Some kind of crisis or a revelation, and you see an opportunity to do something that feels meaningful, right? Helping others solve their problem that you were able to overcome. And so that's really great that, you know, it was so impactful to you that you decided, you know what, I want to help other people solve their mold problems. And here you are. Like, and so I'd love for you to talk about the symptoms, some of the other symptoms of mold exposure, what people can do to test their spaces, the different types of mold, you know, that people need to know about.
Yeah. The symptoms, here's what's really hard about mold is that it's not like if you have this symptom right here, this is what you have, right? It's oftentimes referred to as a root cause of other problems. The reason it's referred to like that is because it becomes kind of this origin point for different symptoms and different systems of the body to start reacting. And every person is going to react differently to this thing, right? So it's not like I had food poisoning, my stomach hurts, right? It's not a direct correlation like that. It's like something is coming into my body that's triggering an immune response and freaking my body out. And now my body is going to freak out in its own way based on how it's built and how it works, right? And so for certain people, it's going to be memory and neurological stuff. For other people, I mean, for me, I had two. I had neurological and then I had my skin, right? There was like two separate things that were going on. But it goes even beyond that. It's gut, it's nervous system, it's hormones, which the endocrine system, it's your reproductive system, so like PCOS and like different things like that. It ties into that. And it can just impact somebody in so many different ways. It could impact multiple systems at the same time, or it could be more leaned into one and not the others. And so it makes it really hard when a person goes to their doctor, you know, who's doesn't really understand this stuff. And they're, you know, let's say more of a traditional like Western medicine doctor. I don't say Western because there are functional medicine doctors that are still rooted in Western and they incorporate other things. And it's just the approach. Like when you look at more your like traditional, let's say general practitioner, maybe that's a better way to say it. It's more around, unfortunately, what button can I push in the system to diagnose you so I can label you with something and then have whatever the solution is for you in my 15-minute meeting that I have with you.
Yeah,
right?
and let's rabbit trail on that for a second because it is a lot. It is a bit like a vending machine system, the medical system, and sadly, right? Your patient goes in, the doctor spends, like you said, a few minutes with them, and they're quickly looking for a button to push to diagnose, and then another button to push to, you know, spit out a prescription for this person to send them on their way. A lot of times the prescriptions are not curative; they just help with their symptoms. Which it should be mentioned that mold also can cause, you know, just like sinus, right? Just that the sinus and allergic type symptoms. I mean, that's probably a real obvious one for some folks is mold spores in the air. Just if they're constantly congested and, you know, runny nose and that kind of stuff, like that can be an issue. But it's a massive problem in medicine as doctors are sadly not trained to be detectives. as they once were. And they're so overloaded with patients that they don't have the time to really dig in and investigate a person's root causes of disease, right? They don't have time to make a house call and to come, if a doctor comes to your house, they're going to observe things about your living situation, right? That might be highly informative as to your condition, right? Like if you got a bunch of livestock coming in and out of your house, it's like, hey, maybe we should curtail that, right? But so anyway, I don't mean to rabbit trail too hard on it, but this is important because you really have to be your own advocate and take control of your own health and your own situation and read and research and reach out to experts like Brian to help you investigate the causes of your health problems. And anyway, obviously mold's one. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there, but like this is something that I think it's just not well understood, right? I think we've been conditioned to think that every doctor is like the doctor on a TV show where they're like really investigating the problem and they're going to determine to solve this case, this medical mystery. It's like, they're not, they're not, man. They're just writing you a script typically and sending you on your way. Like, good luck to you.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are doctors that look at it the different way too. And I think that's like the first step. It's like, I don't want people to hear this, be like, oh, there's no doctor that can help me at all. I'm stuck to chat GPT health research. There are types of doctors that lean more into what you're talking about, being the detective, trying to understand where things are coming from. They're generally referred to as like functional medicine or integrated medicine, or generally kind of what they're referred to. And when you think about like how their approach and how they look at the body, the difference is they're trying to figure out why something is happening as opposed to how do we stop the thing from happening or how do we make it feel better, right? So you're saying you're prescribing something for symptoms. A functional doctor generally is looking more towards what's causing that symptom. And if we can pull that out and stop that, then the symptom goes away. You don't need medicine for that, right? And that's really what we need. And and that community has been growing and growing over the last decade, like significantly. I remember when I used to go to these types of functional medicine medical conferences 8-10 years ago, there might be 50 doctors in the room, 30 doctors in the room, something like that. Now some of these bigger conferences that are there, which I even speak at them and help train. I mean, you're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of doctors that are at an individual one of these. And then there's way more of them that exist now than there did before. And so what I like to think is like in the progression of things, each doctor, then if you think of it, has like a hierarchy of all the people that they help, right? So for every doctor that rolls in, is that 1,000 people that gets touched? What does that ratio look like, right? But the more of them you see it, you're kind of seeing it kind of spread out more. And it's also becoming more of a mainstream conversation as opposed to like this really like, oh, you're doing that like this. And then it's like almost like taboo and weird to say I'm approaching something differently. The concept of, hey, I'm going to try to approach something differently and it makes sense. Like people don't get like shunned and looked at weird now as they did before. And I think that part's really important too.
Agreed. There's a huge movement of functional medicine and holistic healthcare happening, and it's great. But doctors in that space still have the same challenges as doctors in the conventional space, and that is a limited amount of time to really focus on a patient and help, determine the root cause. But it's good that they're wired and they're thinking about root causes as opposed to just treating symptoms, right? So, it's just I guess the point I'm trying to make for folks is you need to work with someone that has a holistic approach, a physician, naturopath, MD, DO, nurse practitioner, but also understand their time and their mental capacity to focus on helping you is limited, to the time that you're with them pretty much. And the rest of the time, like you may need to dig and do your own research to help yourself more than they can. And, the three main causes of most health conditions are dietary, lifestyle, and environment.
Yep.
And of course, the topic here is environment, right?
Yeah. And it's, we work with a lot of people who are referred from doctors. That's primarily who we work with. We have a reputation of being very good at finding problems. Essentially, we just talked about this whole concept of like root cause and all that stuff. We've literally just taken that concept for the body and executed in the house. Like that's if you think of it in that simple terms, we've essentially taken like a functional medicine approach to the house. So if you take that analogy and throw it over into my industry, you have inspectors and people who will come into the house and they're doing a random air sample in a room here or there, which means that they're not getting to the root of what's going on, right? Like to dig into that some more, what most local inspectors will do is they'll come in and they'll do what's called air quality. They'll call it air quality testing in your house. And the rationale for them, which makes sense to so many people, is you breathe the air, let's test the air, right? It kind of lines up when you say it that high level, right? You're like, oh, that makes sense. Let's test the air and breathe in the air. The challenge is the air changes every second. And the further away you are from the origin source of a problem, the more diluted that problem is going to get before it even gets to where your air pump is, right? And so if the goal of an inspection, and this should be the goal of any inspection, the goal shouldn't just be, do I have a problem? If that's the goal, that's the wrong goal. The goal is a couple things. Do I have a problem? Sure. Goal number one. Where is it coming from is goal number two, because you can't fix it if you don't know where it's coming from. So it's great to know if you have a problem, but where is it coming from? And then three, how do you fix it, right? Those are the three things that really have to come out of an inspection process when you're working with somebody. And so if you're one of these local people that come in and they do the air pump in the middle of the room, there's two scenarios that happen. First off, the first one is you're going to get a false negative. I mean, I did this internally a couple of years ago. So it was an internal anecdotal thing that I did where I went into different houses. And if I thought that there was mold behind a wall, which would be a source of a problem, right? I would test behind the wall because you test where you think the problem is. But then I would step away like 2-3 feet away and I would put in a quote air quality air test up just a few feet away. And 78% of the time I got a false negative on that when there was literally a mold source in the wall a couple feet away, right? And so the first thing that would happen in this scenario is that you get a false negative and then you have your inspector tell you, hey, there's no mold, everything's fine. And then again, you saying, hey, I found this guy on Yelp, on Home Advisor, on Angie's List, whatever. They have 5 stars. Everybody loves them. They have great reviews. This person must know what they're doing, right? And so then you put stock in that. And then what happens is that you check off the list that my house is not a problem, and you continue to have whatever health issues that you're having, and whatever doctor that you're working with, one of two things is happening with that doctor. The first is you're working with a functional doc that understands mold and says, hey, listen, I know that person says that you don't have a problem, but I'm seeing it in your labs. You have a mold problem. Like I can tell that you do. And then if you have taken the word of the inspector in the house, you're now going to lose confidence in your doctor that they know what they're doing. You're going to leave them. You're going to go look for someone else, and you're going to go into the next doctor that you have saying, my house is not a problem. I've already had it looked. This is going to derail your healing for years. It derails it for years. I've just seen it over and over and over again. It's such a common story. So that's one path that happens when you do an air test in the middle of a room. You think of what I just played out. This is like a year-long consequence of improper testing in a house and improper guidance that comes from somebody that is doing it the wrong way, right? Now, the next path that can happen off of local inspector air sample in your room, let's say it's one of the 22% of the time where it does say there's a problem, okay? Hey, you got a mold problem in your house. Remember, there's 3 goals. Do I have a problem? Where's it coming from? How do I fix it, right? Goal 1, have a problem. Check. Goal 2, where's it coming from? I don't know, it's in the air. Okay, cool. Goal 3, what do I do about it? I think if you fog your whole house with this magic smoke, this is not even a joke. It sounds like I'm making something up. If you fog your house with this magic smoke that goes through your house, it'll just magically get rid of everything. That is what they'll tell you to do because they don't know where it's coming from. So if they can't tell you where it's coming from, then they can't tell you how to fix it. which means you have a problem. And I'll say, if a problem comes up in an air sample in the middle of a room, you probably have a really big problem for it to like show up on a sample so far away from where its origin point is. So then what happens, this is the second path people go down, is they say, oh, I have a problem. I'm going to do this fog. Because again, the guys, they can sell it well, right? And oh, this fog is great. It kills mold. It does this, it does that, it does all these things. It gets behind the walls. It does this. How are you supposed to know that that actually isn't true and that killing mold doesn't help your problem at all? Because it literally doesn't. You can kill it all day and it's still going to make you sick, right? You don't know that. Why would you know that, right? And so then you go down this path, and this path you spend X amount of dollars. You could spend, 5 to 10 grand for fogging a house, let's say. And then a month later, you're not feeling good again. Why? All the fog did was bring everything down to the ground surfaces. So imagine fog outside, like San Francisco fog mist or whatever, right? What you're doing is the fog that they pump out, it's attaching to airborne particle. It makes the particle heavier, and then gravity does its job and brings it down. So what happens is that people feel better after a fog. Why? Because it's not up in their face. It's down at ground level. And they're like, oh, this worked. And then a month later, 6 weeks later, 2 weeks later, they start not feeling good again. And then they do one of two things there's all these like trees that happen. The next thing they do is they either call the person back to come do it again, or they try to figure something else. Some people get stuck on like a fogging subscription plan because they never actually fix the problem and they just constantly are fogging their house. And that doesn't help either, right? And so these are some of the challenges that exist in my industry, right? And a lot of, the content that I put out and what I talk about all the time, and source is important, and like all the things that, that we talk about. This is how people get better, right? So like when people come to us, this story is pretty common, like what I just described, right? It took a while to find us, took a couple years. Maybe we had a bad inspection experience. We spent, some money here. The doctor's working with us. Finally, they come in, they see us, and we come in and we're finding 10, 15, 20 problems in the house at source level. When I say source level for people, just to kind of explain what that means. So mold doesn't grow in the air, right? And so if we're coming in and we're testing the air, that's kind of what we're talking about. We don't know where it's coming from because it doesn't grow in the air. It moves that way. It grows behind walls, ceilings, cabinets, in your crawl space, in your attic, in your HVAC system, in all these different places. And so what we need to do is understand, is it behind this wall, the ceiling, this floor, this cabinet, in the HVAC, like wherever it is? And the way that we do that, and the big thing that a lot of the local inspectors don't do, is they're very focused on water and moisture. And they'll say, well, if it's dry, it's what happened in my apartment. It's dry, there can't be a mold problem. Your ceiling is dry, there can't be a mold problem, right? Now, I have moisture everywhere else, like they just dried a little hole. But the concept that they come in with is they're literally putting a moisture meter on something. They'll use an infrared camera. An infrared camera, by the way, just in case people aren't aware, does not tell you if there's water somewhere. It just tells you if there's a temperature difference in the colors on your screen, right? So they'll do that, and they'll say it's a way for them to sell if there's water behind the walls. So that's not technically what the instrument does. And then they'll use a moisture meter, and they'll come and they'll say everything is dry. You can't have mold if there's no water, so you're good. The problem is that mold will still exist after the water is gone. Right? So think of it this way. Think about a flower or a plant. You water the seed, the flower grows. You stop watering the flower now, the flower doesn't like take itself out of its pot and then pack its bags and go search for another pitcher of water somewhere to then be next to, right? What it does is it dries out. It starts to fall over sideways. Leaves start to fall off of it. The flower petals start to break off of it. Right? This is what happens to mold. It's the same thing. It's a living thing that grows from a seed, which is essentially a spore, that gets water, that then grows. So when the water goes away, the mold all stays. But the thing that happens even more so after it is that when it dries, it becomes much more easy for it to break apart and move into our airspace. So I would actually argue that areas that are not wet right now, but they were previously, mold had grown and they dried out, which can mean, you fixed a leak somewhere and you thought that you handled it, right? Oh, I had a leak under my sink from the garbage disposal. Yeah, my cabinet got wet, but I fixed the disposal and it's dry now. Well, if mold grew underneath the cabinet, not only is it still there, but when it dries out because there's no more water, it can now break apart and get into your airspace much more easily. And so those are the things when we go through the houses. I joke around when we go through, our goal is we're not looking for mold. If we see it, we'll see it. We're looking for signs of water damage because that's the thing that our eyes can see. And that is the trigger and the red flag that says, if there was moisture here, then there's a possibility that mold may have grown here. And this is what warrants a test in this specific area to see if there's a mold problem. And that's how we go through a space. And I'll tell you, like 90 to 95% of what we see and test in a house, no moisture at all. It's all based off of like peeling paint, or maybe the floor is warping a little, or maybe a baseboard's like separating off a wall a little bit. Just these little clues that maybe moisture impacted something. This is how we identify where everything is. And then we help prioritize which ones are the worst, and then create an action plan for here's how you remediate in the idea of like an 80-20 concept. Like, what's the worst of the worst? Let's focus on the things that are the worst, bring those down. That'll give you the biggest exposure reduction. And then the amount of reduction you need is obviously kind of correlated to how sensitive the individual is. So like, how aggressive do you need to be and how much you're remediating is tied to, how sick you are, for lack of a better term, how sensitive you are, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the general concept.
I think that's really helpful. I mean, any area with previous water damage is suspect. And it does make sense that when mold dries out, it becomes, it's like dust. Yeah. And can just spread around. And then can it not reanimate if that mold dust, settles in an area that has a little moisture? Can it not start growing there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that, actually, because there's like different parts of a mold a mold growth structure in a way. Like think of a tree. So a tree, you have, your tree and you have leaves, right? So let's say the leaves are like a mold spore, let's say. Okay, so spores are what people are most familiar hearing about. So that's like your seed, right? So if the leaf falls off and then it goes somewhere else and there's moisture somewhere, that becomes the seed for a new tree to grow, let's say in this scenario. But if the tree dries out, like we talked about, and you look at a tree, there's way more to a tree than spores. There's branches, there's the trunk, there's all the bark that wraps the tree, there's all the roots that go under the ground of the tree. Like, the leaves are a small percentage of the total collection of what the tree is. And when we talk about what we're exposed to all of it. It's not just the spores. And so the spores, if they land somewhere and they're capable of growing, they can be dormant or active depending on kind of their state or whatever. But if they're in a place where they're ready to grow and then moisture comes in and they're on a surface, you can get more growth that happens there. But when the tree bark and pieces and the branches break off and they move into the space, like, those fragments are not necessarily going to grow a new colony, but what they do is they settle on all the surfaces in the house. They circulate into the HVAC system. And if you think about just the ratio of size from the number of leaves on a tree to the amount of the tree, let's say it's like 70-30 or whatever it is. Well, there's studies out there that talk about how, like, the fragments of a colony in relationship to the number of spores, like if you did the testing separately, it could be 500 times more fragment load than the number of spores that are detected. So one spore could be 500 fragments, and then escalate that 10 spores, 100 spores, whatever, right? So the fragment load gets really, really high. And the fragment load is what we are breathing all the time for the majority of folks, because that gets into our space. It settles down on surfaces. It gets caught up in the dust, like you were referencing. And then as anyone walks through a house or a building, there's this another concept that's called the human cloud effect. And basically it means as anyone walks through any home, any building, anything like that, you're constantly resuspending and popping up settled particle that in your wake. Almost think of yourself like a boat as you like walk. And so the boat has a wake that comes behind it, right? So like as a person walks, you're constantly, like, if I sat in my chair, anything that was sitting on my chair is going to pop straight up in the air, right? Because I've disturbed it. If I bump my desk, anything on my desk is going to pop up in the air because I've disturbed it. It's almost like that character in Charlie Brown that had that like cloud of dirt around him all the time when he walked around.
Big Ben.
Yeah, Pigpen. It's called the human cloud, and it's invisible particle that is constantly following us. So the way that we are constantly exposed in our houses, because it's like, as I talk about mold behind a wall in a ceiling, the common question is like, well, I don't stick my face behind the wall. So like, how's that getting to me? Right. We did an air test for my air quality. It's not here and I don't breathe behind the wall. Like inspectors will tell you, oh, if it's behind the wall, it can't get to you. Like it's trapped. And it's just completely not true. It can work out of the building in a lot of different ways into the space. And what happens is the particles get down on the surfaces. It collects in the dust. All of that pops up in your face as you move. That is your direct, consistent exposure path throughout your house at all times. So it's not that you're sticking your face behind the wall. It's that the wall has introduced a very high magnitude of fragment and particle and spores into the house. And now as I walk, it follows you. It just follows you everywhere, right? And that's the thing. So if you're thinking about how do I structure a plan to reduce exposure, you have to do a couple things. You have to, one, you think of it like an oil rig in the ocean, right? Oil rig leaks, oil gets all out into the ocean, right? The blue ocean now has black all in the ocean. The little ducks are covered. You're getting dawn to wipe off all the ducks, right? And then the first thing you need to do is you need to stop the oil leak, right? That's the first thing. So that's the equivalent of, I'm going to remediate this wall. There's hidden mold behind this wall. I'm going to remediate this wall. That's the equivalent of stopping the oil leak. Well, if you look in the ocean, all the black is still in the ocean. Like the oil didn't suck back into the rig when you just stopped the leak, right? The ducks and the fish, they're still covered. So then what you need to do is you need to clean the ocean. So that's why we hear about like when these big oil leaks, there's like these big ocean cleanup efforts that come, right? Because you have to clean up all of the cross-contamination that's gotten into the ocean. Otherwise, their world, their air, because that's what they breathe, right, is toxic to them at that point. And it's killing them, right? And it's the same concept for us. So then you have to clean the house. And so when you think about remediation, you have to hit the source, but you also have to clean the settled dust throughout the house because that's what's actually getting you constantly. And so it's a combination of stopping the origin point or points throughout the house of where it's coming from, ensuring that your heating and ventilation system isn't still spreading it around so it's getting cleaned or handled appropriately, and then cleaning the full house to reduce kind of all the buildup that's happened over time up until that point. That's the formula for people to get better in the house. And you do that, doctors support you on the other side, and now all of a sudden people start seeing what they want to see.
Are there particular tests? Well, you mentioned this, obviously. If a patient has blood work done, are there certain markers in their blood that may be indicative of mold exposure and mold toxicity in their house? Like what?
Yeah. Keep in mind, not a doctor, right? I just talked to a lot of them. So I'll give you like the top line.
Yeah.
There's blood testing, there's urine testing. There's different things you can look at. On the blood testing side, there is blood testing that you can do that is like blood serum testing that can actually identify mycotoxins in your blood. So that's one way they can test for mycotoxins. So what a mycotoxin is, for those who aren't aware, is the toxin that can be produced. It's a chemical toxin that can be created by a living mold organism. Okay, so a toxin's not a living thing. The mycotoxin's not a living thing. A lot of times when people hear the phrase or use the phrase toxic mold, they're actually referring to the toxin, but you're using the word mold in it, and so it gets a little confusing for people. A mycotoxin is just, it's a chemical that certain molds can create. The mold itself that has the ability to produce a toxin, that's technically what a toxic producing mold would be called. And then the chemicals, the thing on the other side. So when our bodies are impacted, there's kind of two ways, very broadly speaking, that we're impacted. One is from a toxin component. So one is that we actually have the biotoxin in our body, this chemical mycotoxin. The purpose of this toxin is to kill living things. That's the purpose of this toxin. The reason that molds will produce it is as a defense mechanism. So if other molds or bacteria or whatever is coming into its territory to try to get to its food source, it will think of like a volcano. It kind of covers itself like lava over a volcano, creates like a toxic, like moat around it in a way. And then as these other molds come over, it kills them. And it's a protection for their area. Well, think about what we talked about. If lava covered this entire colony and then the water dried up, the chemical toxin doesn't die. It's not a living thing. The chemical is still there. And so when the particles and the fragments and everything breaks off of it, they're now carrying the chemical. And so that's how the chemical can move around. It's actually still a particle mechanism, like particle movement is how it's getting to us, but the particles are covered in a chemical. And so the mycotoxin piece is the piece that is a little more equal opportunity destroyer, if you will, for individuals. It really messes up your cellular function, your mitochondrial function. It messes with the different systems in your body, and it's really a big dysregulator, right? So the mycotoxin piece is a big component. Now the other side of it is if it's not a mycotoxin piece, so you're not testing your body for the mycotoxin specifically. There's a lot of people who are exposed to mold and are having mold symptoms and mold health issues that don't have mycotoxins in their body, right? So it's not just like, quote, toxic mold that's causing the problem, right? It's an overload of, and at minimum, you said this earlier, at minimum, all mold is an allergen at minimum. So if you're breathing in, you're going to have an immune response. If you're overloading and overloading and overloading this thing that's not supposed to be in your body's going to continue to react, overload, and the response is going to get worse, right? And so on that side of it, there's different markers you can look at for like IgG and antibodies and different things like that on the blood piece of it. On the mycotoxin piece, there's a blood test for it. There's urine tests for it that you can do. There's also something called an organic acids test where they can actually look for different compounds in the body that they can then connect the dots to how mold might trigger that particular organic acid in your body to come. So urine mycotoxin tests are a big one that a lot of people do. There's the blood mycotoxin test that can be done. There's an organic acid test that a lot of doctors use to help diagnose mold stuff. And then there's some general kind of inflammatory marker tests that can be done in blood work.
What are the most practical ways to clean surfaces, to disinfect surfaces? If you have, like bathrooms, right? Bathrooms constantly have moisture depending on the ventilation in your house or how long you take showers, right? Steam and moisture accumulates in showers and bathroom walls and things like that. Are there particular products that you recommend for cleaning mildew and mold off of surfaces?
So it's interesting. I would say the first thing before you even get to product is going back to like mold grows because of moisture, right? So you talk about a shower, for example. Showers a lot of times have problems in them. But if you think about what's happening in a shower, I mean, you're pumping thousands of gallons of water into this thing over the course of, a couple of weeks or however long it is. And so your shower has grout lines. It's supposed to drain. Tile, solid. Water won't be going through tile if you have a good tile. It's not super porous, right? But the grout isn't. And so the grout now becomes pathways that water can get back. When you first grout something, the grout's pretty good. It's going to hold, right? But over time, grout isn't like a forever thing. And so as more and more water sits on it, deteriorates it, works at it, right? The grout will start to fail, to deteriorate, whatever it might be. And it creates little like micro gaps and cavities where now water can get behind the tile. And then you can start getting mold issues that happen behind the tile. You might see like a little bit of mold in your grout, but there might be a much bigger problem back there potentially, right? And so I'd say the first thing before it's how do I clean the surface of, if it looks like there's mold growing on the surface is actually like moisture maintenance in a place like that. So like when I do a shower, I have one of those little squeegee things that you do. A lot of people just do it on their doors so their doors don't get weird looking, right? And they don't look dirty and gross and stuff. I do all the walls in my shower, all the way down to the floor. And then once it gets to the floor, I squeegee all the water to the drain. The drain is where it's all supposed to go. But you know how like when there's leftover water, there's just not enough of it to keep pushing it, right? So there's a point where the water just sits and it settles and you have all the beads on the wall and then gravity is going to bring all that down. It's going to get into the joints and the corners. And so a lot of people's showers, like where the wall meets the ground, for example, you'll see that like that's where more of where the mold looks like, or more the damage in the grout is. And it's because the water is just continuously eating away at it. So that would be kind of my first thought, is before it's like, hey, what do I use to, clean something? It's more, how can I prevent something from occurring more often, right? Bonus points, keep a towel outside of your shower that's not for your body and it's just for your walls and the floor. And then after you squeegee everything, wipe it all down. Bonus points for that. You'll be in really good shape. As far as like cleaning stuff, I just really want to be sitting more on natural cleaning products, right? My goal is not to kill mold anywhere. That's not really what the goal should be, right? The goal should be prevention. And if there is stuff on surfaces you could use, there's all kinds of like more natural things that you can use that are antifungal, antibacterial. In the mold world, there's something called Benefect Decon 30. That's like a really good botanical based cleaning product for mold and bacteria and things like that. In a more commercial sense, like Thieves oil based cleaners, that's a natural antifungal, antibacterial as well. Even hydrogen peroxide you can use to clean stuff. So, it's less chemical. You don't want to be introducing chemical into things. And obviously, cleaning is important, but I'd really love to like focus more on the, how do I stop it from happening in the first place, as compared to like, well, how do I clean it when it's on the surface,
Yeah. And what about bleach or vinegar?
So bleach is a hard no. Bleach, the EPA even tells you not to use. And like the EPA is very behind on the mold stuff. And even they're like, please don't use mold or bleach to clean mold. So, if they're telling you to do it, that you don't want to do it.
But, most of these shower cleaning products use bleach, right? Mm-hmm. Like Tilex.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally, and there's a lot of, you start getting into products and what's good and what's not good for the big name brands and stuff like that. But I think generally, as you're pulling back, it's not like these big name products, right? It's these newer, they're a little more common now, right? But these newer, like Branch Basics and like some things like that, where they're more natural based. There's not as much synthetic in there. There's not as much stuff like that. You're going to have a better, just general indoor environment. We've been spending a lot of time on mold, obviously, but there's all this other stuff in here too that triggers you, and it'll just be a better overall kind of exposure experience in the house.
And vinegar?
Yeah, vinegar solutions I've done myself as well. So it's like more water, some vinegar, diluting it out, and I've done that too. Looked into it. It seems that it's that it isn't something that's going to cause any issues. The concern when you're mixing chemicals with stuff is that you don't want to if mycotoxins were produced. There was actually a doctor at a conference years ago that was talking about this, and they're like, and it was specifically to bleach. We was talking about using bleach to clean something with mycotoxins. You're mixing chemicals. Like you're like Pinky in the Brain in the cartoon lab, pouring chemicals together without knowing that you're doing it, and it creates other things. And so you don't necessarily want to be chemical mixing, and mycotoxins are a really potent chemical, right? So to avoid chemical and get to more natural types of solutions is a more ideal scenario.
So how can people, connect with you or work with you, learn more from you? Obviously, you can't go to every home in America.
I'll try to.
Yeah, I feel like you probably have some limitations, as do I, as to, working with people one-on-one. But what resources, I want to make sure that folks that have concerns, obviously this has been really informative, and some people may be a little freaked out right now, and that's obviously not our intention. It's really just to kind of open your eyes to the problems that mold can cause, especially when you don't know you have a mold issue, but you have some health issue, right? It's worth investigating. So where can we point people?
Yeah, well, the first place on my team, we have what we call empowerment coaches. And so you could set up calls with our team from our website. So our website, yesweinspect.com, there's a big button that says book a phone consult. Generally it's people who are at least interested in exploring, an inspection to figure out what's going on and wanting to understand like what that looks like. But I very specifically, we've done this internally in a lot of places. Like we don't have a marketing team, we have a knowledge team. We don't have a sales team, we have an empowerment team. I wanted from like day one of creating the business to really be focused on what we do for people as opposed to like what we do for us, if that makes sense. And so it's really shaped like how we talk to people, how we communicate with them, what we share, and what that looks like. And so our empowerment coaches are who you would be talking to if you're interested in talking about like an inspection, or does it make sense for you? Are we a good fit? Do you think there's even a problem that needs to be looked at? Anything like that. So you can set those calls up. We have running availability, and that's at yesweinspect.com. Outside of that, you mentioned at the top, I have my podcast. It's called Mold Finders Radio. And I took a little hiatus over the holidays into Q1, and we're just kicking it back into gear now. So we'll start ramping up multiple episodes a week like we were before kind of the holiday season. There's like 180 plus episodes on there right now, so there's plenty to dig into. And then last is our social channels, right? We share every day. We're putting stuff out, or this is what hidden mold looks like. This is how it can, this is what health reactions may look like. We're thinking about it, all different kinds of things to help people just sort of kind of navigate this thing. Like we said at the top, you gotta do your own research on stuff, right? You can't rely on one person, I think, in these days to be able to tell you how to do everything and guide the whole thing for you. So it's been a big piece of what I want to do, to just constantly be sharing and putting stuff out. And if something resonates with you and it helps, then it's awesome, right? And I've had people tell me that literally people said, I've figured out like my entire mold problem and dealt with it just from listening to your podcast. And like,
nice.
That makes me feel great. Obviously, your business, you want people to work with you, and most people, at some point you'll probably get a call, but like to know that there's enough information there in a way that can help someone just navigate an entire situation is awesome. And so that's really cool.
Well, I think we both have the same mission. We're trying to help people, and I love the fact that you put so much out there that could help a person and empower a person to figure out and solve their own problem without ever having to talk to you. And granted, you don't make any money from doing that, but that's not the point, right? The point is to help people. And so we have that same MO. I've got a website full of information. It's all free, and I've written books and things, right? So it's like, I just try to share as much as I can. I'm not holding it behind a paywall, right? It's like, pay me and then I'll tell you how to help yourself. It's like, no, here's how you help yourself, And so I love that. I love that about your mission. And it's great that you have that you have a team that can help people remotely. And so good. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. And I mean, just to share, so like we work with people everywhere, and we have for many years. So I've got inspectors that are placed throughout the country to be able to service regions. They all work for me directly. It's not outsourced. They're all trained under, the training that we put in place for our people. So we've been set up like that for years. And yeah, we can work with people anywhere, assuming that they feel like that we're a good fit for them.
That's awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for your time. This has been really informative. There's a couple spots in my house that I'm thinking about, and my in-laws' house as well. There's a couple, water damage spots, and I'm like, maybe I should inspect those. So yeah, I appreciate it personally, and I know my audience is also appreciative for sure, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from some folks in my community, and that's great. You'll be able to help them. So, okay. And just again, let's make sure people know where to find you, your website and your social media channels.
Yep. So our website is yesweinspect.com. On social media, it's Instagram at Mold Finders. It's Mold Finders on all the things. You could find us everywhere with that. And then our podcast is Mold Finders Radio. Those are the three big ones.
All right. Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks again, everybody, for watching and listening. And connect with Brian if you think you need a little help with mold consultation, mold remediation, mold finding, and share this video with people you care about. I think there's a lot of folks, and I said this at the very beginning, so full circle here. I think there's a lot of folks that are having health problems that may be caused by mold, and they don't know. It has never occurred to them. And this could really be a life changer, a health restorer for you or someone that you care about by getting to the root cause of their chronic health problem, if it is in fact mold. So anyway, share this video with people you care about, and we'll see you on the next one.